things.
Yep. And I've pressed live. Let's see. It's a pixelated Yan. This is like 144p Yan, who's just over here, and high definition mic. So
Am I all pixely?
This is what happens, by the way, when you subscribe.
I've had a cold. Maybe that's why.
Oh, you've sharpened up. You just subscribed to Canopy Games, and I suggest you do too, for the sharpest in quality image. Doesn't really work like that, unfortunately.
I don't think we can promise them that. Hello, everybody. How is everyone?
Ah, dear. Good evening. Where did I put my... Oh, it's here. Sorry, I get confused easily. Lovely. So we've got a couple of things to go through tonight.
We have. First of all, happy March, everybody.
Is it March already?
As of today. It says on the title of your thing.
That's a good point.
That's how I know.
That's how I know. It's how I should know. But no, unfortunately... Yep. I forgot about the day. No, brilliant. We've got three main topics to talk about tonight. We've got Godot 4. We've got the new release of Blender that came out the end of last week. I've been waiting for that to come out. There's lots of exciting things there. And also a little thing on Substance. But we'll leave that till later on. Right, so... Hey, Roderick, how you doing?
Feeling full HD. I'm feeling very pixely.
He's not had his pixels today.
I was a little underwhelmed over the weekend, so I'm not quite at 144, but I think I'm at about 480.
Nice. You got no, it's 576, isn't it? The old TV standard, pal. Anyway,
it might well be, pal.
Hey, Daz, how you doing?
Hello, Daz.
Lovely to have people here. So, shall we? You have been playing, and am I right in saying it was with Mag Racer just for a laugh to see what it would look like?
I did a couple of things. So first off, I had a quick look at the nightly build of Godot 4. Specifically, trying to see how easy it would be to convert things from Godot 3.2, whatever version you're using right now, to Godot 4. With a caveat, Godot 4 is not out yet. It is not in beta. It is not ready. It's looking very good. It's got a lot of excellent new features in it, but it is not out yet. It's not ready for live production. And then I just had a quick look at like how to make materials and the lighting changes. And one of the things I found out is currently it's not actually going to work if you just want to just bring stuff across. And there's a couple of reasons for this. First, they've changed the naming conventions. So in current Godot, in 3.x, 2D things are called things like Node 2D. But the 3D version of that is Spatial. Spatial is gone. It's now Node 3D. Anytime there's a direct analog between 2D and 3D, one is called 2D, one is called 3D. Just make it nice and consistent. There are things that don't do that, like grid maps, because a grid map is not just a 3D tile map. It has a whole bunch of functionality that tile maps don't have, and vice versa. But if there is a direct analog, they do, which means you have to go through every single script that uses a 3D node that has been renamed, especially if you're using spatial nodes, and change extends spatial to extends node 3D. Otherwise, it'll just say, this is not a known class, you can't have it. So that's one thing. They've changed how they're tagging variables. And at the moment, it doesn't auto change them. So if you have anything like export variable, it won't work. And there's no documentation out there yet, so it took me a little while to figure out that what you have to do is do @export space variable. So you have to put an @ sign in front of anything like that. Finally, the way materials are working is completely different now for 3D things.
That
which
makes
means
sense.
You can't just bring things over from Mag Racer or even Canopy Cars and say, okay, here it is. I brought over Canopy Cars to Godot 4, and you couldn't see anything. So it's not quite there yet in terms of full conversion. I was on Bass's stream the other day, and he was talking about how... sorry, distracting myself. So fishy.
Who's Bass, just in case people don't know?
Bass is Bastian... what's his last name? Ole, thank you. Bastian Ole, who was working with us on MagRacer and is still going to be working on MagRacer. He was telling me he needs to find the time to do it, but he was working on some MagRacer. He wrote the AI and is going to write better AI. He did a bunch of tutorials on 3D and fancy things you can do with shaders that are really fancy, and little tricks like how to do a working mirror or a window that fakes the geometry. And he's recently been hired by the Godot people to work on Godot 4. He's also responsible for a lot of the AR VR code in Godot. So he knows his stuff. And I was talking to him, and the plan is to get it to convert as much as possible when it's ready. So you put it in, it'll go through. But it can't convert everything, right? Because it doesn't have a theory of mind. It can't figure out what it is you want. So it's going to do the best it can. So you are going to have to know how to tweak it. How much that's going to have to happen, we don't know yet. That said, there's a lot of really cool stuff already in Godot 4. I haven't played with a lot of it, but the lighting stuff is very good. The Vulkan engine is a lot more fun to play with than GLES 3. I think games like MagRacer in particular should really benefit from it. Although if we do convert MagRacer to Godot 4, that's going to be like a solid project. Like that's not a small thing.
Yeah, the Vulkan render engine, that's also been eyeballed up for Blender 3 in the future as well.
Oh, has it?
Because Blender's still working on the OpenGL platform. So there's certain things that just can't be done.
Yeah.
When you're locked into certain graphic platforms. And that's why the graphics side of Godot 4 is going to be so different. Just simple things like volumetrics now work, global illumination,
3D particles or particle collisions. So you could set up, for example, a rain scene and have rain bouncing off of surfaces, which you could never do before, or collecting. You could have snow collecting on certain surfaces. You could have smoke and vapor being pushed by objects. Like we're now talking quite fancy graphics techniques that will be a little difficult to set up if it's just one or two of you, just because getting the model to look good enough to work with those particles and get enough expertise to do every part of that pipeline is not small. But once you've got it working, I think it's going to be amazing.
Yes, Daz has just asked there. So I'm guessing Vulkan is open rather than proprietary. Yes, that is exactly it. It's the Vulkan with a K, though, isn't it? If I remember correctly.
I can't remember. Might be. I also know that the reason they went with GLES in the first place was because they wanted something that was, I believe, open, but well supported and would work on other machines. And then almost immediately after Godot 3 came out, GLES was no longer supported. So now the push is to get to Vulkan. It's looking very good. I mean, just the way in which ambient light works, or procedural skies work, or the fact that you can now set up a shader sky, or a sky where it will not only put the sun in the right position, all the rest of it, it'll actually have the sun able to track across and will automatically change the color of the sky to fit. So as the sun goes closer to the horizon, it'll start getting orange and red and yellow, and it'll just handle that for you, which I think is beautiful.
Yeah, a similar thing was just introduced with Blender very recently with Natasha. No, it's not Natasha. Nisha. Anyway, it's the sky system built into Blender now, which is great because you don't have to go hunting for an HDRI to light your scene. You've got a realistic sky.
Because that was something that you and I struggled with when we started working on the new Andromeda level for MagRacer, because we wanted it to be in outer space. We had this idea for a bubble city, but actually finding a good HDRI star field that looked right, we had the rights to, and wasn't enormous, was really difficult. So having just the ability to write shader code for your sky, for example, is huge. Oh, did you see, by the way, on Games from Scratch, I think it was, on his channel, Houdini Engine is now available as a free plugin for Unity, I think Unreal.
Yeah.
I don't know if it'll work with other engines as well, but that's very interesting.
I've got two ambitions. They are just ambitions at the moment, but one is to get more into Houdini. Houdini is great for using or making simulations. So if you wanted to make water or smoke, you're often better at doing it in Houdini rather than doing it in something like Blender. Although you do have to have the paid for version to export it from Houdini in a meaningful way so that you can use it outside of Houdini, which makes sense. But you can certainly learn a lot with just the free, I think they call it.
There's a lot of really cool stuff you can do with Houdini. Like I've seen Houdini being used to procedure generate building assets, for example.
Yes.
Which I think is very interesting. Anything that you're doing that's big and open world, I think there could be something in that. Especially if you've now got an API that hooks directly into an engine. I think that could really play with it. I will say, how if we do ever do any kind of course on Houdini, Michael, as you're the one who's probably going to be teaching it, I demand that you, when you're teaching it, get a bathrobe with a hood and always pronounce it Houdini.
This is the look that I don't quite understand. No, that reference is lost on me.
Those are Jawas from the popular TV franchise Star Trek Wars.
Oh, I don't know that well.
I think Dad's about to throw something at me.
Quite possibly. That's a really nice segue, actually, into... You mentioned doing things procedurally, especially when it comes to building construction. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to share my screen because rather than me trying to remember, on Blender's website, they've actually got a really nice rundown of the things that have been updated. And I'll just give everybody sort of my spin on the actual setup itself. So if I click this button here, hey, geometry meets nodes. So this has been around for a while. It's like Houdini because you can use a node system in order to generate your geometry, but it doesn't quite, it's not quite up to scratch, but it's being developed so much at the moment, and it's changing. So it hasn't actually been released until now, but it's been in sort of like the alphas and betas on the lead up to this. And I'm really excited, and I'm going to include this in the new course as well. It'll be an overview of it, and we'll go a little bit into there. But since it's changing a lot, we'll have to revisit it a couple of times. And yes, a new modifier. So I'm not going to go into detail as we go down here. So this is all about procedurally generating a world. In this particular point, you can see here that it's got a ground. This would be made using geometry nodes, and rocks are all scattered around. So traditionally, you would have generated a plane and then maybe used a particle system to scatter around some rocks or trees or something like that. But now with geometry nodes, you can do that all procedurally in a slightly different way and with far more control over it than you used to. And let's keep scrolling down. Sculpting galore. I love the progression that these guys have had on their sculpting at the moment. And I watched this earlier, not realizing I was just staring at it. And what they're showing here actually alludes to something that Jelly Mark brought up last week, I think it was, when it comes to the difference in using the multi-res tool or using just sculpting by itself. One of the downsides of just sculpting is you often have to do something called retopology afterwards because you've got such a dense mesh with all of this detail. However, if you use the multi-res modifier...
What is that?
Sorry, say that again, Jan?
What do you say retopology? Like, what does that look like in Blender? What is that?
Oh, that's a good question. So you see here we've got a dense mesh. It was just shown there on screen. Now imagine that, but without it being perfect quads. So if you were sculpting a character or something along those lines, and you started to deform them, this is where
article of clothing. You're making a bandana. There you go.
Yeah, it will distort and it won't look nice. You'll get horrible shading. But using the multi-resolution modifier, you can have a low-res base mesh and just keep turning up the amount of subdivisions. And because you've got quads, they are just perfect squares. They're perfect subdivisions of themselves. There's no guesswork involved. So that is really, really powerful. I can't wait to get into that later on. There are sort of different options along the top here of different things they're working on. But also, if you notice how quick and smooth that is, I think it's sped up just a little bit.
It's really hypnotic, isn't it?
Yeah, it's so nice to watch, but you can just see how quick and easy and responsive that is, which I'm really looking forward to, because traditionally the sculpt tools in Blender have been a bit laggy, especially when you start getting quite a dense mesh. And that's one of the reasons why some people still prefer something like ZBrush, which is a dedicated sculpting tool, because it can handle so much geometry, versus Blender tends to slow down. Typically, well, the last time I tried it, about 4 million polygons, which is still a lot of polygons. But when you're doing detailed skin, or just a detailed anything, it soon adds up. So they've got other sculpting tools here, really, really fleshing that out. Chop, nice. And they've got loads more. So they've really been pushing the boat out with the sculpt stuff. And a lot of this has come from all of the support that Blender's had over the last couple of months or year or so. The Unreal grant, and big companies like Nvidia, and we'll get to those in a second. Nvidia, AMD, they're all piling money into Blender, which is fantastic. Win-win for everybody. So the grease pencils had some more updates. Paul's working in the background on the grease pencil section to the course, and that'll be coming out really soon. And I'm putting together Erin's section at the moment, making sure it's all sorted, and that's going to be released later this month as well, which is fantastic. So nice. More on the grease pencil. Beyond primitive, I'm really excited about this. So this takes me back to the days of using what was it called, SketchUp, where you could just draw on a surface and extrude, and you can just see how this is going to be phenomenal when it comes to just designing a quick something. Getting a level blocked out, or blocking out a scene that you want to do in Blender. I recently, in the very introductory part of the course, was saying about using primitives in order to construct basic objects. And this is just like turn that up to 11. It's really amplified the ability to just mock up a scene.
This one goes to 11.
This one's a bit more of an advanced topic. With Cryptomat is a way of masking out areas so that you can change them individually in post, so when you get to the compositor. So we'll talk about that later on in the course when we deal with compositing, but for the time being, it's there. It's a more advanced thing that most people aren't going to use as a beginner, and you'd more use it later on when you did need to be able to do color correction just on one particular part of your scene. I mean, a great example of a Cryptomat that you will see day in, day out is the person standing in front of a green screen. That's a type of Cryptomat. It's typically called a chroma key when it comes to that. But a Cryptomat is an ID based in color that you can then do something with later on. Speak volumes. So volumes has got more and more emphasis on it. When it comes to volumetrics, they are incredibly intensive, and often there's a better way of doing them than just using a pure volume. But sometimes it's better to just have that realism. Now, for those with an Nvidia card, this is absolutely fantastic. Not only have
an RTX card, by the look of it.
Yes, anything from the 2060 series onwards, if you can get your hands on them at the moment. They support optics, and this is a big one here. Ambient occlusion and the bevel shaders are now supported whilst using optics. Those were two of the things that were holding back a lot of people from using optics. Ambient occlusion adds a depth to a scene, it adds shadows, and helps really create a form. If you look in a corner of a room, there's your ambient occlusion, where two walls meet. They're often just slightly darker. And the bevel shader is, instead of having to bevel your object and have actual geometry, if it's done at a shader level, it's a lot quicker to render. And because it's now supported, you can use optics, which is fantastic because it means that it renders a lot quicker with the denoising. New fluid simulations. We were speaking about Houdini earlier, so this is still coming on, which is absolutely fantastic to see. And yeah, I'm looking forward to playing with fluids. It's been a while since I have. I was probably about 5 when I was last playing with fluids.
Because I'm really looking forward to playing with the collision particles.
Yeah,
like there's something about watching these things interact and seeing how the engine does it that's just really satisfying.
Yeah, I've tried. I was playing with water the other day, and I was just trying out these new ones. It's the simulation time. To get something like you can see on screen here, I'm going to say you're probably going to have to leave your computer on and rendering or baking out that animation, that simulation for a couple of hours, and that's something that holds a lot of people back with simulation. So I'm going to leave that to a later part of the course, primarily because it's so intensive, and you really, I don't want to say you need decent hardware, but to be productive with it, you genuinely do. And it's not currently GPU accelerated, so it's all on your processor. And they're playing with physics on there as well, which comes under the simulation. And yeah, new exposure node in the compositor, fantastic. They got more animation stuff, and I will leave it there for the moment because there is so much to go through. They've also, interestingly, improved the cycles performance as well. Let's switch back to us for a moment. So they've improved the cycles rendering time, which is fantastic because cycles is getting faster. Optics is there as well if you've got the hardware. But if you combine these two things together, it's suddenly Eevee. It has a less of a shine about it. Eevee's great for a quick visualization, less so for anything accurate. So if you need accurate lighting or reflections are a big one. Suddenly using cycles can actually be quicker. And
so could you use cycles and optics together, do you think?
Well, cycles and optics are kind of the same thing. Optics is just the AI accelerated ray tracing, so it can and denoising. Sorry?
Like cycloptics.
Cycloptics, yes. So it's still the cycles render engine in the background. It's just accelerated using their AI technology. What it does enable is, you probably remember when you played in Blender before, it can get all grainy.
Yep.
When you're rendering out in cycles. With I'm not going to try and do a live demonstration because I know that went completely wrong last time I tried it. But doing using optics basically means that you suddenly get a crisp image quicker. It can look a bit smudgy, to be honest, but it can also look quite artistic if you just take your samples all the way down to 1. So it renders instantly and just tries to denoise what the information it's got. You can end up with a very sort of smudgy, pastel-y type render output, which, it is all right. And it's great for some concept art. If I needed to render out a quick scene and get an idea of shadows, you can have it really low on its sample count and just out you go. And that's great for concept work. It's not great for final work, but
sure.
But it gets most of the way there, which is the important thing. Yes. So, sorry, Daz, I was on full screen there, and I didn't have the chat open. Yeah, the sculpting is definitely improving. I'm really excited to dive into all that lot. So, on the Blender front, since we're talking about that, I'm starting the recording of the rest of the mesh. I want to call it mesh manipulation. So there's going to be 3 main sections to this. We're going to start off with all the basic stuff and then move increasingly parametric, which will be using more along the modifiers. So if you've taken our Godot Getaway Blender course, you'll know in that we use a lot of modifiers in order to change certain parameters, hence parametric modeling of whatever it was, the fire hydrant or the number of spokes on a wheel. All of these things you can do parametrically, and it gives you many more options. And with geometry nodes as well, I'm really looking forward to seeing how the modifier stack may be replaced somewhat by using that, because one of the really difficult things was keeping track of drivers. So you can use a driver in Blender to say, well, if this value is 10, this other value needs to be twice that value. Right. So you link the two things together with drivers. But you have to remember what's controlling what. Otherwise, it's just highlighted purple. It's being driven by a driver. But I can't remember what value, and there's no right click and take me to the driver. Unless there is now. That would be a great addition. Or some sort of like spreadsheet or some other control where you can take them out of and manipulate them all individually, which you could do with code. There's no reason why you couldn't do that with code. But sorry, I'm laughing at your pain. I don't know.
It's really hard not to shout into the microphone there. Hello.
Awesome. Yeah, so
blurry cat.
I've been waiting for Blender 2.92 to drop because I knew it was imminent, and one of the big things was that that tool where you could make primitives on the surface of things so quickly.
That's really cool.
Yeah, just need to start with that because it's a nice follow-on from what.
Oh, good idea there from Daz.
What was there previously? Get scripting and highlight. Yes, I don't fancy coding at the moment until I get to coding sections.
Fair.
I don't know. It won't speed up my recording of videos, that's for sure. I remember when I was playing with export scripts for Jan, 2 days just disappeared. I was like, Jan, I've improved it.
Yep.
I've improved it again. It now does these other things. You're like, but I don't want it to do that, Mike. I just need the GLTF file. Yeah, but now it does FBX.
You were exploring and finding like cool things that could do like in the future. And I was like, can I get the files?
No,
yeah, but like, I've done it so it now talks to my coffee machine, but I don't. It's
on the
really
top
cool.
of your coffee,
it's very cool.
It prints the default cube. Oh, nice.
I've got a modifier that turns all the ships into a default cube.
I have done that, by the way. I've written a script that when you press play, deletes the default cube and adds a cube back in.
Yep. That's the first thing you do in Blender is delete the cube and put it back.
Unless you're smart, and then you just save the cube being deleted, and then you just need to add it every time.
No, that's part of the ritual, though.
It is.
It teaches you the transience of all primitives.
That's very philosophical.
No, I'm really intrigued, and that's not the word. I'll go with excited to see what we can do with the new Blender 2 numbers. The features look really cool, and I'm looking forward to seeing the course, and I'm also looking to seeing some games.
So with Blender 2.93, which is in alpha at the moment, they are looking to make that the long-term support version, which is brilliant, because then it'll be around for a couple of years until Blender 3 comes out and rocks your world. Yeah. Rock. That should be the thumbnail for the video afterwards. Do that again. 3, 2, 1.
My face was less metal than yours.
I will admit I've been listening to quite a bit of metal recently.
I've been listening to quite a bit of metal for the past
lifetime.
30 years. I got into metal quite late, so I was already 17 when I started listening to metal. So yeah, almost 30 years now.
Party on. Hi Melicon, how you doing?
Hey Melicon. Oh, my YouTube chat is way slower than yours.
Oh, that makes a change. Usually I lag behind, don't I?
Right.
Nice. So yeah, so that's what's going on Blender-wise. And we were talking earlier about Substance Painter.
No, you were. It's very good. Yeah, we're talking about Substance Painter. Now, we mentioned when we launched the Lifetime stuff, and even in the past, that I'd like to do a little mini course on using Substance Painter for games. Like, I want to keep it very, very focused. And it's going to be an introduction to Substance Painter because there's a lot you can do in there. However, the brand new version, Substance Painter 2021, has just been released. And currently, I can't justify picking that up while recording something because it's just going to sit there on my hard drive not being used. But I think it'd be a fun little project to start with something very simple like a chair or something else. Move up to, I don't know, even a mag racer, but move up to something more complicated where you can really let your thing go. Maybe something intricate so you can really get down to the detail. And then move up to like a low poly creature or a person. There are a few caveats on getting all this done. One, I need to play with it and just get my best practices down. Two, I want to check out their auto unwrapping feature, which is experimental, because currently, if there's any kind of unwrapping stuff on that object, it just doesn't, like, you have to start over. You have to go back to Blender or whatever program you're using and remap it, which has happened to us a few times. I think we're going to have to stick with just well-mapped objects and just say, like, you need something that is well-mapped.
Yeah.
There is something in that I want to experiment with just in case, but...
Yeah, it's difficult because it highly depends, and this will be an interesting sort of onwards from UV unwrapping in the Blender course, because there are several ways in which you can unwrap your objects. And there's no right or wrong. There's something called Smart UV Unwrap, which is push a button and hope for the best.
And it does a thing.
But we've used it several times, and it just doesn't work for our mag racers at all.
Yeah, and I'm not quite sure like what the advice should be there, because I don't know enough about how it makes decisions. Like, there are some parameters. I don't know what they do. I feel like there's probably a line where, like, if your object is this or has these properties, don't use Smart UV Unwrap. If it doesn't, go for it. Yeah. I don't know what those are. So my advice would probably be try it and see if it works. If it doesn't, do it by hand. Yeah,
that's what we've done in the past. If you need to quickly unwrap something and texture it, and it's and it's sitting in the background, or it doesn't matter at the moment, then go for it. Especially if you're in the prototyping stage. So the worst thing you can do, well, not the worst thing, but the worst thing is delete the default cube. But the worst thing that you can do when it comes to playing around with UV unwrapping and texturing, basically, the moment you change your mesh, you need to unwrap again.
Yeah.
So if you add something or you change it, so this is where
I know the worst thing.
Oh, what?
And this is something that I've done, and it's something that you've done, and it's really easy to do. When you're building something complex, you'll often be using some form of modifier, and one of the really common ones is mirror. And if you do the UV unwrap with the mirror modified, you've only got half the object done, and you won't notice it. And then the moment you try and do something like a lighting effect or text on the side, you realize that anything you do on one side is automatically on the other, and you can't do any of the reverse images and reverse text that you need to do to mirror it. Yeah. So forgetting to apply modifiers or applying the wrong modifiers, as we found out recently with the animation.
Yes. So funny story short, I was applying the modifier stack and inadvertently applied the Armature Modifier, which is how we're controlling or getting the bones to control the actual mesh.
Let's play it again with a little less jargon, because I understand what you mean, but I feel like we should probably explain that a bit more. So the mag racer is what we call rigged, right? So it has bones in it. Now we can't see them, but they're bones that say, okay, when this animation has moved the bone here, it's going to move this part of the mesh with the bone.
Yeah.
So that's called the armature.
Yes.
Okay. So when you apply the armature, what does that do?
It just removes the link between the two. Right. So the animation's there, and it's correct.
So
the bones are moving.
Forecraft, ready to go, beautifully done. And Mike said that they should be working. We checked. I looked in Godot. I was like, "Yep, there's animation. Everything's good. It's got bones. It's got an armature. It's ready to go." And I went in to actually bring the craft the game. I pressed play on the animation. And nothing happened. I looked at the actual keyframes, and every single one of them moved from 000 to 000 to 000 because there was no animation data because the bone wasn't attached to anything.
Remember, kids, attach your bones.
Nalagon says, if you want to use Substance Painter's auto unwrap, you might as well use it with Blender's auto unwrap. Probably. Yeah. I would suspect that Blender's auto unwrap is actually a little better. I don't know, simply because it's been in production longer. It might not be. I could be completely wrong. It's not like Adobe don't have the money to throw at things.
I mean, the thing with auto unwrapping is you are at the mercy of whatever the algorithm is. UV unwrapping is not... It sounds really simple, but projecting a 3D surface to a 2D surface is incredibly challenging. Where
you see this when you look at like a 2D map of the Earth.
Yeah.
And like the continents are the wrong size compared to each other.
Yeah, if you've got the Mercator projection, which is the standard one, the Northern Hemisphere, okay, it's done for a nautical reason, but the Northern Hemisphere is far too big and the Southern Hemisphere is far too small. And that's because you can't project a globe onto a flat surface, not without cutting it up strangely, or there are ways of doing it, but ultimately the image ends up distorted. If you look at how Blender's default UV sphere gets unwrapped and then gets projected onto a plane, the very top of it is incredibly distorted because the geometry comes to a point at the top, but you're stretching it out.
Because it's very, very hard to take a two-dimensional piece of paper and make it into a globe.
It's impossible without cutting it into segments.
Right.
Or if it was made out of an elastic, you could stretch it into the shape. But if you stretched it into a shape, and then before you did that, if you drew grid lines across it and then stretched it into a globe, you'd see that some grid lines are stretched and some are smaller. And that's why a UV sphere looks like it does. Looks like the segments of an orange because it's squashed towards the poles, the bit at the top and the bottom, and it's stretched out along the middle. Bit like me, bit stretched out along the middle. I'm a UV sphere.
I'm in very good shape. Round is a shape.
Yes.
Yeah, there's a lot of really cool stuff you can do with Substance Painter. The particles are a lot of fun. You can make smart materials to a degree. You don't have the same kind of flexibility you do with Substance Designer, which would be something entirely different, which I don't have. And that's node-based materials. But that's how you would make things like, I don't know, really fancy lace or whatever you wanted in there. But just in terms of like playing with your tablet and stylus, is my stylus that I use for my videos. Can you see my sketches? This is the one. Or just getting normal maps to do really interesting things, or just if you've got the UV and the right model, you can get really great stuff done very quickly. And there are a couple of tricks that we've found that really help. Like if we want to mask out this part of a material and change what's effective and what isn't, you don't have to go remap it. You don't have to spend ages just very fiddly like erasing things. You can paint directly onto the polygons.
I thought you were going to say mesh. Yeah. Substance Painter is an incredible tool. Obviously, it's a paid-for tool. We're aware of that. Will this be our? Yeah, it will be our first foray into a paid-for product. But looking at the various options out there, you can do quite a bit in Blender. But where Substance really excels is when you've already got the materials there, or if you want to stamp. I've tried stamping normal map data in Blender, and it can be very...
We should be very careful here, by the way, because we're talking about Substance Painter, not Substance, which is actually a different software that does a similar thing.
The Substance Designer. When we say Substance, we mean Substance Painter. Because Substance Designer is a different product. It's for designing Substance.
Well, I just want to make sure that we're not like getting people excited about the wrong piece of software. I think Substance Painter has real limitations, among which are you can't export all of the texture maps onto one, all of your output files onto one file. So, for example, if you've got a mag racer and it has an underneath, a top side, a canopy, metal, engine, all the other materials we have, what we would like to do is get them all down. So like, here's the normal map and it's one normal map, and here's the AO map and it's one AO map, or whatever we're using. But what it's doing is creating a whole list of these files for each material, which we then have to bring into GIMP and overlay. It's fine, but it's more time consuming. And unless you have a good script and you trust the script, it's kind of painful.
And it's workflow choices at the end of the day, because just like, so for instance, labels or names on the side of the ship, they can be done with decals, they can be stamped into the texture. The way that we're creating those craft, they are what you'd call hero assets. So each craft is unique. You're not having a decal in the same place on every craft. They're, even the same craft, but a different team has different layouts. So in that respect, it's much easier to stamp them in. And the way that we're doing the materials isn't using a material ID, it's having the separate materials because it's an easier workflow for what Jan's doing. However, there are pros and cons basically to both
Right.
all different ways of actually approaching something. So
this is why I'm interested, because Substance Painter is a very cool program. I really like using it. I've never really got into texturing in Blender. Like, I understand the very basics, but very, very basics. I wouldn't say Substance Painter is necessarily better than Blender. I think it's probably a more streamlined experience because they've got money to throw at it. Whereas Blender is, a free and open source project. But I think you can get excellent results with that or a whole bunch of other software solutions. But it's one that we've been using, and I think it would be an interesting basic course. We don't have a timeline for it yet. It'll be after Canopy Cars. And I'd need to spend a week or two playing around with the new version just to see what they've changed.
Yeah.
Because there's nothing quite... That's the other thing, of course, is if they update Substance Painter every year, is this something we have to do every year?
I've still got version 2019, and I've followed tutorials in that 20. So,
but as a business decision, is this something we would have to do every year? Because I've noticed people are unwilling to buy tutorials for out-of-date software or superseded versions.
Why have I got access to Substance at the moment? I think for
you bought it on Steam.
No, I've got the latest version. I think it's because if you have, if Mark was around, he could probably let us know. I mean,
you did buy it on Steam because I've seen it on your Steam thing.
Yes, I've also got the latest version, and I think I've got that because if you're a student or a tutor, you can get it for free. You obviously cannot use it commercially.
Oh, we've been jellied.
Yep, there it is. But I'm pretty sure that's the. I think I have to investigate, but I'm pretty sure if you've got a Udemy account, basically you can get it for free.
Well, my main question is more to do with student perception. If a student has just bought Substance Painter 2022 and they're all excited, are they going to pick up a tutorial for 2021?
Yeah. There's always going to be a latest version of something.
But yeah.
I mean, Blender's changed so much in the last 2 years. It's phenomenal the rate of change. I think for us it's just suck it up, record the latest version, or include the latest features if they've only changed or added a new feature, like geometry nodes, for instance, or that primitive thing that might just be an extra video. As long as they don't do an API change and actually change the names of things, that is course breaking.
An instructor point of view, there is a diminishing return here, because if you decide you're going to record fresh content with every version change, that means you've just tied yourself to that piece of software.
Yeah, very true.
And the more pieces of software you write tutorials for, the more you have to do that. And all of a sudden you find that you're not actually releasing new content, you're just updating the old stuff.
Yeah. Well, you update the successful stuff and move on. What happened to remove doubles? Yep. It's still called remove doubles on the Python API. That annoyed me. It's like, why can't it be merged by distance there? Because if you change the API underneath, then you break the versioning and everything that uses such a thing. Yeah. Yeah, there we go. Thanks, Jelly. They need proof of student. Udemy profile screenshot is accepted. That's awesome.
Just an intro should have the core. Okay, yeah. How long before machine learning is used for outdated videos to become updated? Actually, Parkosh, that's an interesting question. Tom, what's his name?
Scott.
Thank you. Tom Scott had a video last week where he got the GLPT2, I think it's called.
Oh, is this the one where he replaced his face and got it to generate or the generating words one?
The generating words one.
Yeah.
He was trying to find good ideas for videos, and he was running out because lockdown, he can't travel around and all the rest of it. And he's kind of burnt out on computer file stuff. So he fed in a bunch of his old videos and tweaked the parameters, and it came back with a whole bunch of really cool videos. Unfortunately, it doesn't know the difference between fact and fiction. So, they're all things like the time Britain built a base on the moon, which sounds like an amazing video, but it didn't actually happen, so you can't do that. And then he got it to write its script. Machine learning is really improving very fast. So how long it is before they can do videos like that? I mean, there's got to be a point where the machine has to understand the concept of what it's talking about, I suspect. But we're getting pretty close to solid content. A lot of news articles are written by AI already, so
yeah, they have been for all of those annoying sites where everything's a news article and it's broken up into different pages, so you have to click next, so you get the whole new load of adverts, so they get their per 1,000 impressions, whatever it is. Horrible things. But they, well, it's fine if you've got something like Safari on the Mac or Firefox or Brave, because it will just remove all of those and show the entire story. It's like, thanks.
I've never heard of that. I'm using Brave, but
yeah, it's worrying how much content, especially made up content. And I think there's a real need for
this clickbait. We looked at the top 10 water bottles. Number 6 will astound you. I like to think those are AI because it saddens me to think that human beings are coming up with this nonsense.
It works though. That's
why it saddens me. Like, there's a certain moral paucity around there somewhere. Doesn't matter if it's any good. Just make them read it.
We need the ad impressions.
Make them.
I mean, I understand the argument both ways, because if the internet was free, completely free, then who's paying for all the servers? Who's paying for all that electricity and everything else? So it needs to be paid for somehow. I mean, us running our Teachable website, it has a cost every month.
Oh yeah, no, I'm fine with that. It's more the current crop of focusing on attention in the way that, for instance, YouTube algorithms do and newspaper algorithms do, to find out what we should be running, has some unforeseen and quite unpleasant side effects.
Well, it's just, without getting too deep into it, it's mass manipulation, isn't it?
Yep.
The moment that you have all of that big data, you can coerce people, or you can convince them something like the English base on the moon. Especially with today's
There was
CGI.
a really interesting documentary I watched on YouTube by Folding Ideas, whose stuff I like because it's a mix of very arty and very academic. Like, he does really long video essays. One of them was, I think it was called In Search of the Flat Earth, where he's talking about the phenomenon of flat Earth theories and what it is they actually believe, and how very little of it is actually to do with the shape of the Earth, and why it's you can't actually argue with them because they're not open to being convinced. And he just goes down into conspiracy theories and how they work. And it was kind of fascinating. But one of the things he pointed out was the sudden rush of really quite disturbing conspiracy theories came about just as the YouTube algorithm was prioritizing, you like this, let's find you a more condensed version of it. So people who were quite prone to being convinced by slightly out of center ideas were getting more and more radicalized into quite extreme ones.
I remember a few years back, it was told to me as the Google bubble. The fact that, so say you always searched for holidays abroad, and I was into world affairs and what was going on, Google would eventually narrow down things into a niche. So you end up only being served things that you will click on.
Yep.
So you will get things about, and I remember this because I was looking at a holiday in Egypt at the time. Never went because I suppose my girlfriend at the time, she brought me this thing and said, look, there's some holidays in Egypt and they're heavily discounted. I'm like, I'm pretty sure in my newsfeed, not Facebook newsfeed, but I'm pretty sure in my newsfeed, I used Google News or whatever it's called. It was something they decided to kill off, and I loved it. but I'm pretty sure that name rings a bell. I'm pretty sure that a bomb went off there like last month. Yes. Of course, Shia was always looking for holidays, so it was serving her holidays in those regions. I was looking at news, so it was showing me.
Although the discount does make sense now.
Yes. Now the discount makes sense, and no, I'm not going. But it's that sort of thing. It's dangerous if you end up in essentially an echo chamber where you're just getting fed stuff that you have already searched for. I mean, the best thing I've ever seen when it comes to advertisements is so we've got a large family. My partner and I combined, it's 7 people. So we've kind of outgrown the small 7-seater, which is really 5 with a 2+2. Not 2+2. Sorry, like kid seats in the back.
This is a car, right?
Yeah, right.
Okay, because the T-Rex impression was confusing me.
and so we've looked around, and short of a minibus, an XC90 is a great thing. So we found a really old one. It's about 12 years old, because we can't afford to run a modern one at all. But it's amazing now that we've got one. I'm getting Volvo ads everywhere. I'm like, I bought it. Why are you trying to advertise at me? I don't think that's the one thing they haven't worked out yet. Like, have you bought the thing that we're advertising? I don't want another one. Really don't want another one.
I remember there was a phase when I was living in the US where phone manufacturers were being accused of leaving the microphone off for advertising cookies or for advertising algorithms.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things that's really hard to debunk or confirm because confirmation bias is a thing. For instance, in the apartment I was living in New Jersey, there was a laundry machine way down the basement, but it was expensive and it was quite hard to get to. And it was often, crowded. So we did some research and I found a portable washing machine that you could put in the bath or you just put next to the bath and you put the hose into the bath and you did the timer and you plugged it to the wall. It did it. It was called a Panda. It was great. And I was telling someone about it. And the next day, both of us independently started getting ads all over our phone for Panda washing machines. I'm like, is this a coincidence or is this actually happening? It's one of those really intriguing little, I want to say this is connected, but I don't actually have evidence of that.
Yeah, I've had similar things with Facebook ads. Like, now, have I just talked about this, or have I searched for it and they've used big data to know that I've searched for it? They don't necessarily have to link it directly back to me. That's the dangerous thing. They say that all of this data is anonymized, and it really isn't.
No.
Once you've got everything, if you've got all the data, they can pinpoint what you've been doing online very, very quickly.
Well, we've been at the point for a few years now where even if you don't take part in these services, they have a pretty good database on you because of all the other people who've mentioned you.
Yep. Whenever a friend tags you in something on Facebook, they might be interested in this because their friend is. And that's not unreasonable. That's not an unreasonable
We're
stance.
now veering into the ethics and politics of computer algorithms, which is a fascinating topic, but not one that I am qualified to discuss, and probably not one that people are here for. So let's
talk about games.
Okay, let's make a game about.
I think one exists. So recently, I downloaded. It took a day and a half to download Ark again.
That'd be Ark then. Yep.
And it's interesting. So we were talking about this just before the stream, and I you've played lots of Ark. I've played a small amount.
2,000 hours in it. Yeah,
something like that. I've got maybe 20 or something. So I know how to start the game. You punch a tree and pick up a rock, and you make. It's the standard Minecraft formula at that point.
Doesn't it sound like the beginning of like a sea shanty? You punch a tree and pick up a rock.
Hey ho! Yes, maybe.
That's a video for Atlas right there. Atlas is Sea Ark, by the way, if you're curious. But anyway, carry on.
Yeah. So, I was talking to Jan about. I know there's a basic tutorial, but I've never learnt how to tame an animal. And I didn't even know that was a thing. And when you get the animals, they can increase different ones increase different resource collections. I'm like, that's fascinating. But how do I find out about this without just sitting through a load of YouTube tutorials?
Well, experimentation.
Yep.
And wikis. Some of the things will actually tell you. For instance, the Argentavis, which is a giant bird. You can make the saddle for the Argentavis, and it will tell you works as a smithy. So anything you can make in a smithy, like metal picks, you can make on a bird, because that's what I want to do when I'm on a bird. I want to make metal picks.
Yes.
Like, as one does.
That's the thing. The game doesn't have to make sense. I mean, there's obviously a reason why why a saddle also acts as a workbench. I mean, or a smithy, did you say? As in like a big thing
crafting
that you
table.
Crafting
Tier
table.
2 crafting table. Yep.
Yeah. So, but it's interesting, just abstracting it back a little, on how a game like that can get away with not having a tutorial.
It's interesting for a lot of people, and this is true of Minecraft for a while. The trial and error and the discovery was part of it. And the sort of wiki was this unofficial fan-made thing for people who didn't want to do that. Like, recipes in Minecraft were things that you just had to know.
Oh yes, there was never a recipe book to begin with. You needed to know that you drew it in a certain
Minecraft randomly a couple of weeks back, and there's this new recipe book, and I pressed it. It's like, here's everything you can craft, and if you press it, I'll make it for you. I was like, well, then why is there a recipe system? Why don't I just have a list?
Yes.
So I think part of it was that. Like, there's a lot of discovery in Ark, if you wanted to. Up to and including how they do the plot. There is actually a plot to Ark that explains things like why you've got dinosaurs that never lived at the same time next to mammals, like the woolly mammoth, that did not exist when there were dinosaurs, and humans who did not exist when dinosaurs were around.
And what's this diamond in
why
my
there
arm?
are so many predators on this tiny island with not enough herbivores to support them. Like, that's actually directly mentioned in the plot, but you have to go discover the plot and piece it together through little notes that you find hidden in places, and then find your way to the bosses and do the bosses.
Yeah.
I can't be having with any of that. I just want to build things and tame things and make things and have adventures.
Yes.
Like, I think I beat a boss once cheating just to see what would happen. Because I didn't want to. There was a nice little cutscene. It was very fun. But I had no real desire to sort of grind through with a whole bunch of people and do the plot. The downside of that is there's not actually one way of taming creatures. There's the typical way that most creatures need.
Yeah.
And then there are passive tames that have to be tamed a little bit differently. Okay. So, for instance, an equus, which is a precursor to a horse, is tamed by you sneaking up to it, jumping on its back, and feeding it carrots or vegetables when it tries to buck you off. How do you know that? You try it. Because if you try and tranquilize the thing and feed it berries, nothing will happen. And then there's ones we have to steal their eggs, and they tend to be things like wyverns.
Which sounds a lot like withers, which is something completely different.
The big dragon things, and they get very grumpy if you steal their eggs.
I don't know why.
Yeah.
I heard they're good scrambled.
It does mean that the game rewards large investments of time. And it really wants you to spend that much time in it, which I think is...
I was going to say, I think that's why I've struggled with it, because I very rarely get to spend hours in a particular game.
I've never known you spend more than an hour in Ark or Atlas. And then a week later spend another hour, by which point everyone else is like...
Yeah, totally. I feel like sometimes I suppose that I can get left behind with the plot, and everybody's like level 20, and then... And I
like... On the other hand, I've seen you get 20 levels from a single snake, so quiet you.
Yeah, but I don't know. That's the thing. You can have all the gear and no idea at that point. Like, I can make lots of things.
And Atlas are worlds that reward you for living in them.
Yes.
For developing that expertise, for finding the little tricks and traps. Like Jelly mentioned bowlers, right? They're lots of fun on your friends, but they have other uses. And the primary use is something fast is going, you can hunt it or tame it. But why I like bowlers is things like terrorbirds and raptors who come at you in threes, and you throw bowlers at them, and then you walk behind them and you stab them with a pokey stick. And the way you know that is practice.
Yeah. I'm unpracticed at the game. That's the problem.
Mm-hmm.
So I will get better at the game. I certainly this time round, because it's been probably a year since I've given the game a go, and I definitely got up to speed. I was already building a house within the first hour. You know, I didn't feel like I was struggling on the mechanics as much. But then I get to this later stage, and I'm thinking to myself, well, I've just unlocked all of this stuff, and I don't know what to do next. And that can be frustrating, because I'm obviously going, oh, I've got an hour. What do I do? And
it's
an
not
hour.
a good game for I've got an hour.
Yeah.
Because you have to either set your own goals or go with the storyline. And the storyline assumes that you have a bunch of people and a lot of grinding.
Yeah. I've noticed when making what have I been making? I've been making like a wooden floor. So I can't remember what the floor pieces are called. We'll call them wooden floors.
Foundations.
Yep. Foundations. There we go. And I've chopped down half a forest to get not half a forest's worth of wood on the floor. I'm like, surely that tree should have given me a bit more wood than like 10 pieces.
Mean, those are server settings and things, but it was designed originally for large groups of people working together. Yeah,
so you'd a whole team chopping it down would build it in no time at all.
It gets really annoying when you've got large groups of people, or even a small group of people, and you start unlocking firearms, and now suddenly you need ammunition, which means you need a huge amount of charcoal, and you need a huge amount of spark powder, which is flint and stone. So someone has to go around attacking every single rock, and someone has to go around burning every single tree.
One thing I have noticed is that rocks respawn.
Just like in real life.
Just like in real life. I'm like, what? Okay, I can live with that game mechanic.
Well, it's either that or have resources that never come back. Unless you build too close to them, in which case they never come back.
Yeah. That's how I found out.
I once tried turning that off and just have everything respawns, and I couldn't get into my house because it was full of trees.
That's why they disabled the a spawn radius. Yep. Makes a lot of sense. Interesting how to balance a game like that, though. I mean, it's a very beautiful game. It has a lot going for it on that front.
Very good modding community.
Yep.
I like the Crystal Isles map, but there's some things about it that annoy me. Not least of which is it'll keep spawning you when you respawn at the beginning. In these beautiful areas, there are these large high up plateaus that you can't get up and down from.
So you have to drop to your death, essentially.
Yeah, it's like we'll just build multiple ways up. Like, I haven't really explored it yet, but yeah, that's a thing.
So one of the things that was a recurring theme for the hour when I first logged on, I was like, excellent. Oh, I can see where we are. Yeah, I'm going to head over to those coordinates. Got my map out. Okay, let's go. And I'm dead. Okay, I've respawned. I've respawned in front of a giant crocodile. Oh my god, it's chasing me. Ah, I'm dead. Okay, I've spawned. Oh, there's some birds over there. They're coming towards me. They look like seagulls. Oh, I'm dead.
I'll tell you I think I've told you this before. My first really clear gaming experience in Ark was playing single player. I was playing on the island, the original map, back in beta or early access. And I built myself a little hut. I was very proud. It was just a thatch hut, little beach hut. And it's got a little bed in it so I can respawn. It's got a box with some spare things in it. I'm feeling very grown up. It's got a fire with no ventilation. So I cook food and good. I'm not going to freeze to death. And if anything fierce comes to me, I'm going to run in the house. So I'm going to go out and murder some dodos. And here comes a giant crocodilian thing. And it's huge, just like 40 foot long. That's okay. I'm going into my house. And the next thing I know, it's eating my walls trying to get to me. It was one of the frightening experiences of the video game I've ever had.
Oh, that's perfect. Yes, apparently my body has been devoured whilst I've been offline. I got a message earlier saying, "You've been nommed." Om nom nom.
Yep.
But I was asleep in a bed.
Someone was probably hungry.
Yep.
But it was one of those learning experiences. Was like, okay, so certain creatures will attack structures, and not all structures are strong enough to take it. Like that's one of those things you learn as you play.
Yeah. Well, I get that. Yeah, it's definitely a very different game from Minecraft. Even Minecraft is one of those games that I feel, probably because the entire world is destructible and constructible. You know, you can build a house out of mud if you so wish. And you can make it any size you want. So there's no restrictions on height, and things float. You know, that has a certain benefit to it. But I do like how pretty Ark is at the same time. And you can make Minecraft pretty.
You can make it pretty, but it's not Unreal Engine pretty. I mean,
no, it's close. And now supports RTX if you're lucky enough to get your hands on one of the blooming cards. I still haven't managed to get that running on my computer. I downloaded it and it said, "Oh, you need to click this button and go to settings." I was like, "Okay, la 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 la." No, it's not.
Do you have an RTX graphics card?
Yeah.
Oh.
And it didn't work, so I was like, It's fantastic with optics though. So on Blender, if I use the Blender benchmark for it, my old graphics card would take 35 minutes to render the benchmark.
Mm-hmm.
The new one, 6 minutes 30 something. I'm like, oh, that's a bit of an improvement. Just a bit. So yeah, that's made a huge difference to being able to render things out. It's basically the same speed as an old render farm that I used to use. Because you can do that with Blender. You can send your stuff off elsewhere to be rendered. Not the rest of the house, turning on all those computers one evening. That was fun, though. It did cut a render time less than half. But the kids weren't happy.
The problem I've got with games like Ark and Minecraft too is the beginning is very challenging. Especially if you don't know the world yet, right? You're going to die every 2 minutes. And then the first time you get a structure, especially if you're not me and you're lucky enough to spawn somewhere with creatures so you can get hide and make a bed and have a place to respawn, it starts being a little safer. The problem is when you get to the late mid-game, and there are no real threats anymore because you can either deal with them or you've got enough resources back at your base that if you die, it's annoying, but it's not the end of the world. Yeah, and there comes a point where suddenly the game's not that much fun.
I had I suppose a similar experience in Minecraft where the window, and this is a version difference, the Windows version was easy. You know, at night time, maybe, I don't know, 20 zombies would spawn over the entire night, and a creeper would creep up on you and blow you up at some point.
Creepers be creeping.
Yep. But then I played with my brother, and he said, "Oh, you need to get the Java edition because then we can play it with mods and all the rest of it." And then I just played vanilla Minecraft, but Java edition. And at nighttime, it was horrendous. I was out in the open, and I got completely swarmed with 7 or 8 zombies at one time. It's like, how can such a game that's so similar have such a different play style to it? The fact that it's hard is actually hard in...
I mean, I've never played the Windows version because I got it when it was still in open alpha. So I only ever had the Java edition.
Many moons ago.
Well, I suspect when Microsoft did it and they started shifting the game more towards children.
Yeah, possibly.
It makes a lot more sense to say, no, we're tweaking this because the Java edition will just murder you.
Yeah. Is there a difficulty level in Ark which has permadeath?
Yes.
Yep.
Or, more accurately, you'll die and come back at level 1.
Okay. But your structures that you built and everything will still be there. Yeah, I've played a few games. So one of my zombie games that I've not actually played. It's been updated recently. I have to have a look at it. Project Zomboid.
Hmm.
It's a realistic zombie game, if such a thing exists, where you have to make sure you've got food. You can quite easily die of thirst, and if you get bitten, that's it. That's permadeath. There are no difficulty levels in it, really. Just how many zombies there are is the basic thing. And one of the challenging things with that was actually having a way in which you could understand the world and make sure that you could survive. It was very challenging on that front, and I don't know what my actual other point on it was. Ignore me. I'm rambling.
Cool.
I'll remember it in a
Has
moment.
anyone got any thoughts, questions, concerns?
Mikey's brain has now failed.
Yep, and Jan is falling asleep. So let's
coffee depleted.
Yep.
Yeah, what he said.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, if you've got any questions, now the time's to ask before brain words make sense. Gone.
Before the brain words make sense. I've been like trying to. Okay, so for those of you who don't know, I live out in the countryside, and the nearest town is an hour's walk away.
Yeah.
Like I'm in a little hamlet, but there is town's a walk away. It's not normally a bother because I can get my groceries delivered, and there's a little store in the village.
Yeah.
Except the guy who runs the store has hurt his back and has closed the store indefinitely until his back is back. And the supermarket has a 2-week waiting list all of a sudden. So I had to walk to the supermarket today and walk back. I'm quite tired.
Yeah, the supermarket is not a short walk either.
It's an hour there and then an hour back holding heavy bags.
No. I've just remembered what I was going to say. It's about the permadeath thing. You can build up a base, but if you perish in the game, you will obviously respawn. You respawn on the same map, which is absolutely huge. But if you set up a base, you can just walk to the base and there's a car with the keys and everything else. So you can at least get a bit of a leg up on your previous game. Yeah.
Daz says he can't think of owls.
He's crossed his T. It's
Oh,
out.
Yeah. I just like the idea of no, can't think of them. Mustn't.
Must not
Although,
think of owls.
With a Scottishy accent, because he's not me. I like to think that everyone in Aberdeen sounds like this.
That was a really poor Scottish accent. You ain't heard nothing yet, Mike. Okay, thank you everybody for joining us this evening, and we will be back.
Stay safe. Have a lovely March.
Yes, it is March. Got to remember that. Thanks everybody. Take care and see you next week. Bye.